I actually think that the 20s probably are the most important decade in your life in terms of setting the trajectory for the rest of your life until the end of your life. You get a guy that nobody can do things as well as he can. He's hyper autonomous. When you get a guy that has no respect for his father, has no respect for church leadership, has no respect for his employer, that's a guy that's messed up. If you're not a leader, if you're always the guy that's passive, and that may be expressed with self-deprecating comments or silence or withdrawing, you need to be discipled out of that.
Yes.
Take initiative of life, to take initiative in life, in relationships and jobs.
Welcome to the Leadership Now podcast, hosted on Beachhead Media with Dr. Aaron Rock. Aaron has served as a pastor, a preacher, a chaplain, a writer, and a speaker, and he has a keen interest in helping other Christians to think Christianly about all of life. On this show, we like to talk about the nuts and bolts of theology, church life, ethics, leadership, and other relevant matters that will help you to lead better now. I'm your host, Eric Oltrop, and last time we sat down, we started a new series on life stages, we're calling it. So in each of the coming episodes, Aaron's going to offer counsel to a different stage of life. So last time we did teens. This week we're going to start on our 20s and then 30s, 40s, and so forth. So today we have some advice for people in their 20s, like myself. And so this is all important. We went over this last time. This is important because as Christians, we're called to make disciples. And discipleship involves, like we said, preaching the gospel and teaching sound doctrine. But it also involves just practical advice from people who have gone before us. So Aaron's wise. Aaron's a very wise guy. And so I'm sure he's got lots of good things for all of our 20-year-olds out there. So Aaron, why don't you start us off and take us away?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I've thought about this, Eric, I actually think that the 20s probably are the most important decade in your life in terms of setting the trajectory for the rest of your life until the end of your life. I mean, there's so many things that happen in your 20s. You literally go from being a teenager to an adult. You could, by the end of your 20s, just in one short decade, be married, have multiple kids, have earned a couple degrees, have been certified in some trade. You could have purchased a house. You could be an employee, an employer. You could have investment properties. You could be holding some sort of civil elected office. I mean, the 20s is incredibly significant in terms of getting out of the gates, being released from your parents' household, and establishing patterns financially, relationally, that will affect your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, hundreds and tens, however long you live.
Yeah.
And all of that is in your 20s. I quite enjoyed being in my 20s. I don't want to go back there, but so many things happened in my 20s. I met my wife. I got married. We probably had 3 or 4 of our kids by the time I hit 30. Had earned a couple of degrees, was in pastoral ministry, planted this church. Wrote a book. So many things happened, bought a property. So many things happened in my 20s, and it's really, really an exciting time to be alive. And while the way I think of it is in your teens, you're under authority a lot. You are establishing those basic worldview categories that you're going to think in. You're getting your moral foundation in place, but you're still not really responsible for a family, a property. You're probably not working full time, but your 20s is very different. So whereas in your teens, you're laying that moral foundation, you're trying to get things sorted out in terms of your identity. In your 20s, you need to know what your identity is. And then you're laying the foundation for your career, your life, your family, your church involvement. And so I would just plead with 20-year-olds, do not squander your 20s. Don't dawdle. Don't waste your time. Step on the gas. It's a great time to be alive. It's an exciting time to be alive. You're healthy. You're strong for the most part. Use this decade to the absolute max. It's really a fun time to be alive.
Yeah, it is. I think so. I'm going to be 27 soon.
Well, you're almost out of it. So
yeah, no, I'm at the tail end. Yeah. So what are some usable advice for people like me in their 20s?
Yeah, so I wrote down 8 or 9 things that I thought we could talk a little bit about, and feel free as a 20-year-old-ish guy to interject and throw in some of your ideas as well, because I know you've sat under my pastoral leadership now for a couple of years. You've been through a discipleship group. We've had conversations. You serve on church staff. You interact with your peers a lot. You're a married man. You're a father, so you probably have some good things to add too. But here's one thing that I think needs to be said. It might seem pretty basic because this is a Christian podcasting program, but it needs to be said. Take absolute and full responsibility for your worship life, for your walk with Christ, and for your work for Christ, your ministry. Take responsibility for it. Don't expect a youth pastor to be breathing down your neck or holding you accountable. Don't expect your parents to be telling you, get out of bed, we got to go to church. In your 20s, you need to have established good spiritual disciplines. If you're not reading your Bible every day and you're in your 20s, you're acting like a teenager. If you're not regularly in prayer and you're in your 20s, you're acting like a teenager. If you're not tithing yet, you're acting like a teenager. If you're not serving in your church, if you haven't discovered your spiritual gifts yet, you're acting like a teenager. In your 20s, you need to establish good spiritual disciplines. You should know or be in the process of getting to know your spiritual gifts. So are you wired as a teacher? Are you wired as an encourager, a servant? Do you have special gifts in the area of giving? How has God uniquely wired you? If you don't know the answer to those questions, ask someone who loves you and cares for you and who has observed your life. Pray about it. Ask for God to reveal to you what your unique contribution to his kingdom is, how he has especially wired you to serve and to bless the body of Christ and the kingdom of God. One of the ways we do that, by the way, just as a sidebar, is to serve broadly in our 20s. So you don't need to be worried about being a specialist in ministry in your 20s. Even if you're a young pastor and you're in your 20s, you don't need to worry about being a specialist. Take advantage of the opportunities to do as many things as you can and get as many experiences as you possibly can as a young leader. That will only bless you. You can wait till you're in your late 40s or 50s or 60s to be the specialist. Maybe it will become evident that your real and most meaningful contribution to the body of Christ is to counsel people or teach the word of God or be a servant behind the scenes. But in your 20s, you want to kind of dabble in a little bit of everything and then see what charges your battery or what depletes your spiritual energy. I did a quick search online. I was just curious, what if I just punched into my search engine advice for 20-year-olds?
That should be good.
I received like no helpful feedback. It was lists will come up on the screen, and they basically, if I was to summarize them, revolve around self. So things like enjoy yourself, embrace yourself, take good care of your body, work out a lot, go on vacations, take care of yourself. It's just self. And this is the world within which we live. And evidently the 20-year-olds of our age who are outside of the Christian church have bought into those lies because there's a lot of people in their 20s that are just selfish.
Yeah.
They're partying. They're having sex with anything that moves. They're spending their money on exotic vacations. They're wasting time pursuing degrees and certificates that they don't even know what their calling is. They're just back in school this fall for yet another degree or yet another certificate with no direction. There are some people that have had 10, 20, 30 boyfriends or girlfriends and no intention to marry, or they're dating and there's no desire to move to the next level, which is obviously marriage. They're wasting their time. They're immature. They're childish. And so instead of learning, you want to learn about yourself, of course, but for the purpose of serving someone else who is God. So true success, of course, is in a servant of God. So I would just say, hey, work on your walk with Christ, but don't just make it, you and Jesus hanging out over a Bible study and cappuccino. Make sure you are serving in your church or in your serving, I'll say more broadly, serving the kingdom of God.
Right.
This is foundational to everything else that will bring you success in life as a Christian 20-year-old through 29-year-old. Really, really important.
Great. That's great advice.
Okay, the second one, and you and I chatted about this morning a little bit before the podcast, and that is that, let me use the illustration of driving. So in order to get to your destination, let's say your destination is Vancouver. So there's certain things you have to do in order to get there. So the first thing you got to do is you got to learn to drive, right? So you go through some driver's training, or your mom or dad takes you out, or your aunt or uncle takes you out, and they teach you to drive. Then eventually you're tested and you receive a driver's license. And then you got to save up some money and purchase a car. And then you have to have car insurance. And then once you get all that in place, you get in your car, you turn the key, or nowadays push the button. Car starts up and you pull away and you accelerate. You start to step on the gas, you accelerate, your car gets up to speed, and then you're cruising toward your destination. Now that period of acceleration is reasonably short compared to the trip, but it's necessary. And then you're gonna repeat trips like that, or destination trips like that, for the rest of your life. It might be just around the corner, or it might be across the country, whatever. But I think that this illustration is somewhat like life stages. So in your teens, you're sort of learning to drive. You're learning to drive, but you're also learning to drive. Like you're trying to understand how life works. You're trying to figure out values. You're trying to figure out, what the rules of the game are. And you're under the authority of an instructor, hopefully your mother and father, and then augmented with pastoral leadership in your church and teachers in your academy. And then if we go forward in life, let's say you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you're cruising, right? You're raising kids, you're dealing with conflict, you're bringing home the bacon, you are building the kingdom of God, you're taking dominion. But the 20s, I would say, are the years when you really need to step on the gas. Those are acceleration years. Those aren't the years that you should be trying to learn what life's about. You should have kind of learned what life was about in your teens. Your worldview is established, but in your 20s, you got to step on the gas. You got to burn the candle at both ends. People may not like that statement, but I think it's important to burn the candle at both ends. So in your 20s, you don't want to waste any time. You want to be gunning it, man. You want to be, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but you want to be like after your education, after your career, after a spouse, saving up money to buy a house. You want to be after your life calling. You want to be seeking to really become good at your craft, your trade, your vocation. Like get out of bed early, go to bed late, serve hard. You're young, you're energetic. I read this someplace years ago. I don't even know how you figure this out, but someone said that from the age of 0 until about 25, you're growing up. Your body is, we're always kind of dying, but we're growing up. But after 25, there's more of a sense, even biologically, that you're actually dying. You're starting to peter off. Like things are starting to plateau, wear out, and descend toward death. So
I feel it.
So
I'm past 25
so
now.
You're 27, did you say?
Yeah. Soon. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're like 2 years over the hill. So people say I'm over the hill. Yeah, I've been over the hill for like a quarter of a decade or a quarter of a century. But basically, a third of your life, your body is growing and developing, and then for 2/3 of it, it's kind of a slow downward decline. And so, in your 20s, even physically, you're designed, you're built with energy. You have. I know it's harder to get out of bed when you're in your 20s. I remember, and that'll go away if you're in your 20s. Hey, good news is, eventually you'll have trouble sleeping. It won't be like the trouble getting up. I remember in my 20s, like just sleeping like a freight train could go through the room and I wouldn't wake up. But now, I wake up probably multiple times in the night, at least for a second or two, and roll over. Yeah, I'm just more aware of what's going on. I can hear sounds outside or whatever. But your body is strong. Obviously, unless you have some health issues, but your body is generally strong in your 20s, and you have energy and you have less to risk. So put the pedal to the metal. Like, don't waste your time hanging out with your buddies 3 nights a week playing pool. Like, get after there's nothing wrong with leisure and vacations and all, Sabbath time. We're cool with all that, but step on the gas. And if you handle your 20s well, like if you really pursue your schooling hard or your trade hard or marriage hard or start raising a family and really push at establishing yourself financially and spiritually and learning what your spiritual gifts are and serving in the church, all these basic things, you will be able to enjoy more of that cruising period through your 20s, 30s, through your 30s and 40s. Once you get into your 50s and 60s, you start to become more of a papa bear, a mama bear, a mentoring figure. 40s and 50s are often your 40s, 50s, and 40s and 50s are usually your high productivity years. Like if you're good at your job, everybody wants to hire you, right? Which is not necessarily true if you're 25 and you're untested. Then in your 60s, you start to sort of throttle back and you start to move into those senior years where you're really a sagely figure to others. But I just want to encourage young people who are in their 20s, like step on the gas. Be strategic with every month, every year that God has given you. Get after it. Don't waste your time. Don't spend 1 year, 1 semester in school if it's not purposeful. Don't pursue purposeless relationships. If you like a girl, but you know she's not marriable, guys, move on.
Forget her.
Girls, if you're with some guy that's just dawdling and he's in his 20s, he doesn't really know what he wants to do and he's not quite sure about when he wants to marry, dump the dude. Like, don't waste time with people. So many people waste time even in dating relationships in their 20s, and all of a sudden the pool dries up and they're in their 30s. They're like, uh-oh. I wasted my years. I squandered my years in those prime years for dating and establishing a family with people that weren't serious about life. So I would say step on the gas and you will enjoy the benefits of that when you're in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. And if you're a parent, for the love of your children, make them step on the gas. So if you're a parent and your kids are still living in your home and they're in their 20s, it's fine. There's sometimes good reasons for that. But don't allow them to continue to act like teenagers. Like for Pete's sake, don't allow them to continue to just breeze in and breeze out and not participate in chores, not pay rent, and just kind of dawdle. Like they should be treated like tenants, really.
Yeah. Like
they should be expected to contribute just as much to the household as you do. And if they don't, you're babying and coddling. You're robbing them you're actually ripping them off as a parent of helping them to use their 20s for what they should be using them for, which is those acceleration establishment years.
Yeah. To kind of validate some of your claims there, I know I'm not super old. I'm going to turn 27 soon, but it really is true. Like even now, like I think I kind of noticed it this year or last year. I was like getting so tired by like 9 a.m. And I was just wondering, where did this even come from? Kind of even 3 or 4 years ago, I could stay up till 1 a.m. no problem. And it does like, I don't know, life just does take a toll on you, you know, and you start to lose energy as you get older. And
well, you're also married and you have a child, and there's an innate sense of responsibility that we're not even always aware of as men or as parents. Like I'm responsible for a large church. I'm responsible for my wife. Like for many years, I was responsible for 5 children. Like that weight of responsibility. It's like, man, I got to take life seriously here.
Yeah.
Like if I squander or waste my time, other people are negatively affected, and that can reduce your energy level and cause you to be a little bit more tired. But that's okay. That's part of pouring ourselves out, you know, for others. And the idea of sleeping in till 10 o'clock or noon or wasting time or not having a schedule, that's the thing of that's the life of the teenager.
Yeah.
But it's not the life of someone in their 20s and beyond.
Right. And I just have kind of one more thing on this point. I think kind of in my early 20s, when I reflect on my own life, I think I had some kind of limiting beliefs almost that I feel like our culture tells us that 20-year-olds are still kids, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. And it's not the way it was historically. 20-year-olds were super mature. You were a man in your teenagers, like 13, 14. But now we just delay maturity for so long. And I think I started to believe some of that, and I kind of had some limiting beliefs. Like I do have time. I'm not really capable of getting married or starting my own business or like, doing these things that adults do. But I just want to speak against that. And if you are 20, like you totally can. Like you can even do it when you're before 20. Don't believe culture's lies in that sense. They're not helpful, and you're going to regret it, I think. So
yeah, and I've said this before on different podcasts where by the time you're 18, you should see yourself as an adult. Right?
Yeah.
You're fully equipped. I'm an adult. I'm a man or I'm a woman at 18. Make sure you know the difference, by the way. And you are an adult. You don't become an adult when you're 20. You're an adult when you're 18. And you should be acting that way a bit before. But you're still kind of teetering on the balance for the most part. You're probably almost for sure living in your parents' home.
Yeah.
You're probably not quite done school yet. And you're still a teenager. But when you hit your 20s, I just think you need to make that mental shift. Mm-hmm. Say, I'm in a new stage of life. This is my acceleration stage. This is my step on the gas stage of life. And I'm going to go for it.
Yep.
And I'm going to get everything in place. So by the time I hit 30, I'm married, if that's what the Lord has called me to. I have kids on the way or, in the bassinet or whatnot. I have my career. I've purchased a home or I'm in the process of doing that. And I know it varies from region to region, right? Like I totally get it. I'm aware of the fact that there's some constituencies in our country that the Lord may call you to live in where you may not be buying a house till you're 40. But
yeah.
For the most part, we encourage people to just, if they can, to move into that stage earlier in life, right?
100%.
Now, here's a third one. And I think this might sound a little odd to people when they first hear it, but I want to flesh it out, and I think it'll make sense when we do that. And that is that in your 20s, one of the things you must do is, this is the stage when you have to fully embrace your masculinity or femininity. Now, that doesn't mean that when you're a child or a teenager, you're not aware of your masculinity or femininity. You should be. And that should be developing. But there is an innate insecurity with all teenagers that I've ever met. There's questions like, what does it? So I know I'm a man, but what does that mean? What does that look like? I know I'm a woman, but what does that look like? I'm female. I'm male. You understand it, but there's still some insecurity, some question marks in the minds of teenagers as to how that plays itself out in relationships and in decisions that we make. In your 20s, that ambiguity needs to go away and that insecurity needs to go away. And if you're a man, you need to be able to say, like, I am a man. I am confident and comfortable being a man. I'm going to act like a man. And if I'm a woman, I'm comfortable in my femininity. I understand what it means to be a female. And I'm going to live as a female, and I'm going to embrace that. Again, this might sound odd, but I think it's important to say that by the time you're in your 20s, you should be fully comfortable in your manhood or your womanhood. That doesn't mean that you've experienced every experience that you will experience as a man or woman. But it's like, I'm a man and I'm going to act like a man. So I'm going to pursue a woman. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to exercise initiative. I'm going to exercise redemptive aggression. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be a tender warrior. I am going to be a man, and I'm not going to apologize for being a man. Now, how do you get there? Well, obviously, it starts with a biblical foundation. So right back in Genesis, you need to understand maleness and femaleness and the relationship between men and women and husbands and wives. You need to, study all the passages about male leadership and male headship and how to control yourself sexually and exercise your sexuality with purity and all of these sorts of things under the category of manhood. And likewise, young women need to be studying the Bible to understand what it means to be a woman and be comfortable with that. But having laid that biblical foundation, most people need examples. And because Christianity is an imitative faith in large part. It's not just a creedal faith. It's not just a propositional faith that affirms certain doctrinal positions. It's imitative. Like Paul said to Timothy, like, follow me, be like me. Jesus is calling people to be like him. All through the scriptures, there's a side of the older, the younger, mentoring and training, and the sage in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, training the younger and calling his son to listen to his counsel. So knowing those theological categories is important because the Bible is our ultimate authority, but get discipled formally and informally.
Yep.
Get into a discipleship group. If your church doesn't have discipleship groups for men and women, you're missing the boat. I mean, unless it's a brand new church or a small church, I get it.
Yep.
But like taking the mature women and putting them into situations that they can disciple the younger women is so strategic. And likewise with the older men and the younger men, those discipleship relationships where we can sit down and we can say, and you and I have done this and I've done this with other young men over the years, you know, like how do I pursue a woman? Like, what does that actually look like? And the older guy helps the younger guy understand how that works. So I know I'm supposed to handle my money and be a good financial steward, but like, how does that actually work itself out? And we talk about that.
Yeah.
How do we deal with daddy wounds or mommy wounds or, you know, the situations we experienced growing up? How do we deal with issues of forgiveness? So it's almost like group counseling, group therapy, if you will. Being discipled by people who have been there, done that is really important.
Yeah.
And then acting your gender. Now, I know that there is and we need to affirm this, there's a variety of male personalities that are still manly and godly. Everybody doesn't have to be the, truck driving, tobacco spit and, horse lassoing,
wood chopping
guy. But we also need to look deeply into the scriptures and ask ourselves, okay, if I'm a man and some of the characteristics of manhood are things like taking initiative, which is pretty foundational, or being a leader, like leading other people, starting with myself, being self-disciplined, leading myself, leading my wife. Well, then one of the things that every man will demonstrate is leadership. That's not a personality characteristic. It may come easier to some than others. But if you're not a leader, if you're always the guy that's passive, which is the Edenic sin, you're always, and that might be expressed with self-deprecating comments or silence or withdrawing. Like, you need to be discipled out of that.
Yes.
To take initiative of life, to take initiative in life, in relationships and jobs. So embracing your masculinity and femininity, there should be no question when you're looking, let's say, at a guy in his mid-20s, that's a man and he knows what it means to be a man.
Yeah.
Or that's a woman and she knows what it means to be a woman. Again, you may not be married yet. You may not be fully through your schooling or whatever, but you understand and you've embraced and you're comfortable with your sex. So read the Bible. If any of that is ambiguous to you, read your Bible, study your Bible, listen to good podcasts, read good books on it, get discipled, and act your gender.
Yeah.
And I think even in hindsight, so my story is being raised in a broken home where there wasn't that being necessarily, those teachings were not taught to me and they weren't being demonstrated to me with great clarity in my single parent household. Doesn't mean I'm jinxed.
Right.
You're in a vibrant church, other men, you watch them, you observe them, you're discipled by them. They kind of help you to work through that, and you get to hit the reset button too and learn some things from scratch for yourself by God's grace. And he'll teach you. God doesn't want you to stay in the dark on these matters. He doesn't want you to be confused about your manhood or womanhood. He wants you to be clear on it and live in light of the gender that he has assigned you at conception. So.
Yeah. I think a note on discipleship, I agree. It's so important. I benefited so much when I was in your group and just being discipled every day by men I surround myself with. And if kind of like you said, if a 20-year-old is listening to this and they're not in a church that has that kind of structure set up, I think, I know it can kind of be awkward or maybe you feel kind of weird doing this sort of thing, but just pick out a man who you want to be like in 10 years and then have no shame about it. Have no shame about asking this guy to go out for coffee, or maybe, like you said, maybe even set up some sort of somewhat formal discipleship meeting type of thing. Have no shame about that, because right now you're young and you don't have a lot to offer. And I love that saying, like, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, the older I get, the more I realize I don't know. There are so many things you don't even know that you don't know. And if you did know them, it'd help you out a lot. And I've benefited from that greatly. So
yeah, there's things you want to know in life that you seek out. And then there's those eureka moments where someone says something or communicates something to you and you're like, man, why did I never think about that?
Yeah, exactly.
Like all of a sudden the door opens and the light floods in the room and you're like, wow, this helps me to see things with a lot more clarity.
Exactly. So I just wanted to say that about discipleship. But
okay, fourth thing is I want to talk about interdependence. So as a general truth, well, this is absolutely true when you're really, really young. So babies and infants and toddlers and little kids are absolutely dependent upon caring, loving adults for everything, right?
Yep.
Food, shelter, clothing, education. Then you kind of motor through life and you start to enter generally a phase of more independence. So teenagers are generally bent in this direction. They overcorrect. Mm-hmm. So they don't want to be dependent, so they become independent. So I don't want to listen to you. I want to do my thing. I want to manage my own schedule, do homework when I feel like it, this sort of stuff. And there's a lot of discipline often takes place to help them to see that that's not always helpful. But what you want to do as an adult is you want to learn to be interdependent. So we go from dependent to independent and back to interdependent, which is the balance. And interdependence is where you know yourself and you're contributing to others and you're taking full responsibility for your decisions and your choice. You're not passing the buck. You're not blaming mommy and daddy. Okay, right. In your 20s, you're not blaming mommy and daddy for ripping you off or whatever, right? You're taking responsibility for your actions, for your choices, for your behavior, for your spirituality, for your relationships. And yet you're also seeking out relationships, seeking out counsel. Now, I have 3 sons. I'll use my sons as an example because they're men and they're all manly men. But I noticed this pattern even when I was raising them, where they would listen to me and obey me, but I could tell, especially in their teen years, it's like, I kind of want to be my own man, right? Like I want to do my own thing. Like they didn't mouth off to me or really push back, but there's attitudinally, you can kind of tell, and this is just part of our development as humans, that they don't really want to hear what dad has to say.
Yeah.
And that can trickle into the early 20s as well, where young men are often still making the mistake of wanting to be independent, not listening to anybody. And unfortunately, there's some people that carry that attitude with them all their lives. Like I've met guys in their 30s and 40s and even 50s that are still not under authority and are still hell-bent on absolute autonomy.
Like church authority? Or
church authority. They can't hold down jobs because they have no respect for people. So if you get a guy that's critical of government, critical of church, critical of his father, you have a man that's messed up. That's one of the things you can look for. When you get a guy that, like, nobody can do things as well as he can. He's hyper autonomous. Mm-hmm. When you get a guy that has no respect for his father, has no respect for church leadership, has no respect for his employer, that's a guy that's messed up. Mm-hmm. We expect it of teenagers. But what you want to do is when you get into your 20s, instead of running from authority, okay, you put the brakes on and you start to meander back.
Yeah.
And as young men move into their 20s, and again, I've seen this in my own sons, it's like they want to get away from dad, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, actually, let's come back. And now let's enjoy an interdependent relationship where we can both share, we can both contribute to one another. And we actually are willing to ask for advice from older men. Maturing adults will find that balance. They will value interdependence. They will value the balance between taking full responsibility for their own behavior and seeking a lot of good counsel and advice from generally a multiplicity of other personalities. So this is something I think in your 20s, if it's not a characteristic in your life, it needs to be hiked up the list to one of your top 10 values. I want to be an interdependent person. I want to spend the rest of my life that way. I want to take responsibility for myself, not pass the buck, but I also want to be in relationship, in meaningful, vibrant relationships with others. Some of the hindrances to that, well, I was hurt in the past. Well, get over it. We all were. Well, I'm having a hard time forgiving such and such. Well, you need to, right? It doesn't mean you need to restore the fullness of the relationship if you're abused or whatever, but don't allow other people's behavior, negative behavior, to continue to hold you back, right? Take responsibility for yourself. If you have addictions in your life, deal with them. Don't blame the system. Don't blame God for not giving you endurance. Don't blame your church of origin. Like, take responsibility for addictive behaviors and surrender them to Christ and give them to Christ. And yet at the same time, you don't need to do it alone, right? You need to be in a healthy, in a series of healthy relationships. And I find that one other point I'll make is a lot of people will want like a best friend. I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's better to have lots of best friends.
Okay.
Because if you have one person in your life that you go to, which is like your best friend, that's the person, that's always the default friend. You can talk about anything. What if that person dies, moves away, that relationship comes to an end, and all of a sudden you're absolutely alone? It's better to have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 guys or women in your life that you can go to and you've developed meaningful friendships with, because life changes. And by the way, when you get married, there's another dynamic which single people often don't think about, in that it's perfectly fine for a married man to have good guy friends, and it's perfectly fine for a married woman to have good girlfriends and spend time with them. But if you're developing couple friends, like couples developing friends with other couples, well, now you got 4 personalities that kind of all have to jive, right? So let's say I have to appreciate the guy in the relationship and be able to get along with his wife, and she has to appreciate my wife and be able to get along with me. And, there's just more of a, there's a reduced chance that that's going to happen than if it's just 2 people trying to connect. So for couples to build good couple friends that last for life is rare. So developing friendships with multiple couples on different levels with different dynamics, I think, is wise counsel.
Right? Yeah. The older I've got, the more I realized friendships are definitely more fickle than I thought they were.
They can be, yeah.
More than I thought they were in like high school, for example. When I was in high school, I thought, oh yeah, these guys are going to be in my wedding. These guys are going to be with them till we're 80. And I still appreciate a lot of these people, but the older I've gotten, the more I realized, a lot of your friendships are just kind of based around, like, for lack of better terms, like kind of convenience, just where you are in life, like
life
geographically.
Stage. I had 5 guys stand up with me at my wedding. I haven't seen them for years.
Yeah.
The last guy I would have seen was probably like 3-4 years ago, right? The one guy I have not seen for like almost 30 years. So friendships come and go, and it's not that. It's just we move, right? We moved to different provinces. We went to different areas, and you sort of, life just takes a turn, and that's true. So and I've found this in my own life as you get older. Obviously, especially when you're in a position of influence, and you're a bit more of a public figure like myself. It's harder to find people that get you, that understand what your world is like and can be okay with that, and also meaningfully speak into your life. And the reality that there's one person that's going to fulfill that completely, that's not going to happen. Right. So I like to pursue a variety of relationships and each person contributes to my life in a different way. And I have a lot of people that I really respect and appreciate that are a huge blessing to me, and I hope I'm a bit of a blessing to them as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So here's the fifth one: start a family. Now, I'm not being dogmatic. I'm not saying if you've hit the 3-0 number and you're not married, you suck, right? But in your 20s, if the Lord has called you in that direction, step on the gas and pursue a family. So what that starts with getting married, which starts with having conversations with members of the opposite sex. So I would say in your 20s, pursue marriage and start a family. This is going to include strategic dating, not haphazard dating. I've talked to some young people over the years who are dating. I'm like, oh, how's the relationship going? Is it moving toward marriage? Oh, we're not really thinking about marriage yet. Now, what on earth are you dating for? Like, what are you thinking? Well, you just want someone to kiss? Like, what are you doing? When you date, it should always, and without exception, be for the express purpose of determining within 1 and no more than 2 years if this is the person you should marry. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're not ready to date. This is why 13-year-olds should never be allowed to date. Mm-hmm. They're not even adults yet. So date strategically. We've talked about this in other podcasts. You're going to ask good questions. You're going to get the father's permission if you're the guy to date the girl, which sets up the whole male-female headship role, communicates that from the beginning, affirms that, honors that. You're going to keep your relationship pure. You're going to practice functioning as leader and the leader of the household if you're the guy, and the submissive wife if you're the woman. You don't ultimately have authority over the girl you're dating if you're a guy, but you're going to be testing the waters in those areas to see if your views line up, and talking about life values, life goals, children, all that sort of stuff. Lots of things to discuss, but not just, oh, let's go for a movie. Oh, that was a nice movie. What do you want to do now? Go for ice cream. Okay, see you later. I'll drop you out. Like that's not a date. Mm-hmm. That's wasting time. Like every date should have, doesn't have to be like intense, but every date should have something about it within which you're discovering something about the other person and keeping Christ at the center.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, and then when the relationship's ready, marrying and not delaying the relationship beyond that point. So there's a sense, I don't know how to describe this other than to say an aware person will know when the relationship has ripened to the point that it is time to marry. So if you've ever grown anything, fruit, vegetables, berries, carrots, tomatoes, whatever, you plant this, the seed comes out of the ground, a little plant takes hold, and in a season, or if it's a fruit tree in several years, the blossoms are out, and the tiny little apple or the tiny little grape or whatever is forming on the tree or the shrub or the vine. And then you're watching it, and let's take a tomato, for example, because it's summer and a lot of people grow tomatoes. It goes green, then it slowly starts to turn kind of a little bit orangey, and then slowly red, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, this is a deep red. And if you leave it on the vine, it'll very quickly rot. It'll disintegrate and fall off. So you got to watch it, and you got to pick it when it's ripe, when it's ready. And in a relationship, there's a natural progression where it will ripen to the point that it's like, okay, I know I'm going to marry this girl. I know our relationship is ready for that. And some people set themselves up for problems when they delay it another year, another 2 years. And the relationship can start to stagnate. It's almost over-ripened. Sexual temptation can overcome the relationship, or there's like a sense of tension or angst because they're sort of kind of psychologically acting like a married couple, but they're not married yet. Yeah. They're kind of like holding themselves back. It's like holding the horse back at the gate when the gates have already opened and the bell's gone. So this is why you have to be careful too about how far in advance you date someone. So I know it works out for some people, but I just think it's generally speaking a bad idea to start dating someone if you know you have no interest in marrying them for 4 or 5 years. I just don't think that's a good idea. Well, I want to do another degree, or I want to do this or do that. Well, you can get married while you're in school. Lots of people do. We did. I know lots of people that do. It works out fine. And then I would say part of starting a family is, again, back to the discipleship thing. I think Christianity is largely an imitative faith. So befriending and observing newlyweds as you're preparing for that stage, learning from them, as you're preparing to have kids, being around babies, serving in the nursery, saying, yeah, we'll babysit for you. Like, that's a good thing for young couples to do, to babysit, to take care of other people's kids. You sort of start to figure it out. It's a little odd that some people never hold a baby until they've had their own.
Yeah.
They've never taken care of a child, even been around a child until they've had their own. And it's a much steeper learning curve than if you've had some experience around kids. So when I was 17, I became an uncle. My older sister had a baby. His name's Josh. And, I had to take care of him sometimes. And so I had I didn't have a lot of babysitting experience, but I had some of that. I used to babysit the neighbors' kids. I would, I even served in the church and toddler room at one point, which I didn't really like, but it gave me some idea of child dynamics. Yeah. So it wasn't, it's always a shock to still have your own kid in hand, like you got your little guy, but you have some orientation to what this is going to be like rather than completely steering clear of kids.
I wish I would have done that more, because when my kid popped out, I was kind of,
how do you hold this child? Yeah. Holding him by the foot.
Yeah. Here he is.
Your wife's like, what are you doing?
That's all great. I think a note on dating, I was kind of thinking of something. I see kind of my peers and people a little younger than me falling into this. And I don't know what you think about this. I don't know if you'd agree, but I think to some extent, I think people who are kind of dating, who know like this is not going to work out, should learn to break up quicker. I think some people just hold on to a relationship when maybe they just haven't thought it through fully. Maybe they haven't like actually sat down, reflected on this. Can I raise a child with this person? Can I be married to this person like forever until I die? I don't think, maybe people just don't think about that. And I think people kind of need to learn to just let go quicker and move on. Like, don't waste your time. Don't waste their time. And obviously not every relationship's, it's not going to be perfect, but like we probably differ in this sense. Like back when I was dating, I was maybe a little too intense on the first date. I was asking like non-negotiables. I didn't want to waste my time. I didn't want to waste their time. Is this going to work out? I was kind of that person.
Will you marry me?
Well, my day 3, is.
Well, I would say maybe not so much in asking those questions, but I did date a couple girls before my wife, and they're, as far as I know, godly women today. But I was probably too intense or maybe too worried. I think I was seeking perfection.
Okay. Yeah.
Without necessarily knowing it.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know how to balance. Like what are the things that I could let slide? And what are the things that are non-negotiable? And it wasn't clear in my mind.
Yeah.
So like the slightest conflict, is this going to lead to a divorce down the road? So those are life skills you have to learn, and being mentored by people and having people around you can ask those questions of is important. But part of it is just learning. But you made a comment about breaking up. So we're probably not going to be able to get rid of that language anytime soon because it's so common in culture. But I wonder if it might help if we got rid of language like that, or at least tried to, and thought of it more as, okay, we're dating, but it's not like a mini marriage where we're like together, we're absolutely committed. This is us. We change our Facebook profile to let the world know we're a couple. And then there's this dramatic breakup, which almost feels like a divorce, and maybe even gets people accustomed to the feeling of a divorce. That's how we do it in the West. But if people entered into a quote unquote dating or courtship relationship, and they kind of had a different mindset, and they kind of had this mindset that, okay, you and I are we really like each other. We may even be full on in love, but we're going to kind of have an agreement here that this is an exploratory relationship. It's kind of like a probationary period. And we're not going to set our expectations so high. We're not going to be like, oh, I'm definitely going to marry this girl. I mean, how many people have thought that? And it doesn't work out and they feel like their whole life has fallen out from under them. So being a little more measured, a little more willing to admit that the relationship might not be leading toward marriage right from the beginning, like adjusting our mindset.
Yeah.
That's probably going to express itself in not like needing to be together every single day, like we've discussed in the past, or texting each other every day, or cutting off all your other friendships, which is a mistake that a lot of young dating couples make, where all of a sudden all their friends are thrown to the curb because they're just with each other nonstop, or making out, interacting in this intense physical way, that's for marriage. I don't, like, I'm not suggesting, of course, the dating relationship should be like some sort of a business transaction. Okay, here's a job description, sign them a dotted line. Like we're on a 30-day trial period. I'm not suggesting it's like formal like that, but maybe being a little more open-handed when we go into the relationship, and not feeling like we got to hold that person tighter. This is the person. I got to make this work at all costs. Being strategic, but also being a little bit more relaxed and casual about it is a balance that can be hard to strike, but it's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah.
I know this because when I started dating my wife, I made a deliberate, conscientious choice not to bring as many assumptions into the relationship and not to be so intense, especially in those early months, and just to kind of like enjoy her company and spend a lot of time together and ask good questions, but not be so thrown off by little differences, like to take time to explore and not to assume, oh, she's the one. Oh, for sure, she's the one. That came several months in. And then there was a period of time, and I think I've shared this in the past with folks. So we kind of went out on a date in December, started dating a little more officially in January. And then January, February, March, April, May, it wasn't until about June that I was like, I am like, on my end, I'm convinced I want to marry this woman. And, you sort of have a conversation about that. You discover that the Lord was also working in her life. Whereas the other ones, it was more like, I'm probably going to marry her because I went on one date. That's not good for you. Mm-hmm. So, okay, let me just flesh out one more aspect of starting a family. So I think that I've said before, if you can, have more kids. And I don't want comments like that to die the death of 1,000 nuances. So, but I do need to nuance that a little bit because I know it's a sensitive issue. I'm not saying the more kids you have, the better person you are. It's not true. Mm-hmm. And it's an insult to people who can't have children. Or it's an insult for whatever reason to people who have to stop after one or have to stop after two or whatever that number is. It's an insult to people who, you're not a better person because you have 15 kids.
Yeah.
You're not more godly. You shouldn't be bragging about it. You're not more godly because you have 5 kids as opposed to 4 or 6 as opposed to 3 or whatever. Like, that's not cool. It's your children are a stewardship to you. And there's no maximum age. It's not like the Bible says, okay, by the time you're this age, you got to stop having kids. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I'm just going to throw something out, and that is that if you're going to have children for many reasons, I think your 20s and 30s are your best years to have children. And there's certain reasons for that. So one is your sheer energy level. I mean, kids are balls of energy, and just having the energy when your body is younger and stronger, having the energy to wrangle kids. Yeah. It's just better to run with them, to play ball with them, to wrestle with them, whatever. Like it's just better. And then there's a second dynamic, which I don't know if I should say this, but I'm kind of learning this as a grandpa. And by the way, we're waiting with bated breath for our third grandchild to come. We're really looking forward to that. He was due a couple days ago, but apparently it's going to be a little delayed. But I'm not sure that I would be a particularly good baby daddy anymore. And the reason for that is because I've become a little more gracious, a little more tolerant, a little less interested in strong discipline. Now, in order
soft,
very soft, yeah, very feeble-minded. No, let's not take this too far, Eric. But I've thought about this. There's a natural softening that does take place later in life, and it's not a bad thing. It's just the way life works. It's probably biological. It's just a life stage thing where, as you get older, you just become less willing, I think, or less likely to like crack the whip with little kids. Mm-hmm. And that's why grandparents are often known as the ones that, please and appease and give and love and care. But you need that mom and dad. You need those young people that are like, smarten up. Don't do that. Because I've advocated for that. Like, you don't let your kids say no. You discipline your child. It's critical. And I'm sorry to say, but when you get into your 40s and 50s, you just have less of an inclination to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of a family that had a block of kids in their 20s and maybe into their early 30s, and then took a huge hiatus and then had more kids. And if you look at these two blocks of kids, they're completely different. Mm-hmm. Like the first ones were well-disciplined. The parents were kind of on them, pushing them. And the others, frankly, turned out to be kind of brats. Mm-hmm. Like they just weren't, the parents just didn't have the energy. They just had them later in life. They didn't have the energy to really influence them, discipline them in the same way. And you might say, well, that's not very principled of you. Like, why can't you just put the same disciplinary tactics in place if you have kids older in life than when you're younger? Like, I don't know. It's just the way it works. Like, you just move into a different phase.
Yeah.
So I think maybe this is part of God's design. This is just my theory, that He's designed our bodies to have kids. We're more fertile, we're more energetic, we're more willing to discipline, to deal with those issues when they're younger, to crack the whip, to be like, little kids need a mom and dad that kind of have a bit of a police officer mindset. Mm-hmm. When you get older, you become less interested in policing behavior, become more interested in mentoring and instruction and this sort of thing. It's on a different level. So I just think it's a good idea to have kids when you're in your 20s and 30s before you start acting like a grandparent.
Yeah.
And then I'll throw one more thing out, not to strike fear into people's heart, but you do have more, everybody knows this, you have more risk of birth defects and other health issues the older you are.
Yeah.
So, people it's a proven fact, you're more likely to have children with disabilities if you're having them later in life than when you're younger. Mm-hmm. And this actually is also true in the mammal world. So there's a biological aspect to it. So this is why getting married younger is beneficial. It's not, I'm not judging people that have kids in their 40s or 50s. I'm not saying you're a bad person, okay? But again, don't let my comments die the death of 1,000 nuances. It's just that for many reasons, I think it's better to have those kids when you're younger. And the final thing I'll make about that is, if you think about how life goes, I don't know of anybody alive that would say, I'm cool if my mom or dad dies when I'm 13, right? Most of us want to have our parents around and interested in our lives well into our adult years.
Yeah.
Like, I'm in my 50s. Both my parents are still alive. Mm-hmm. I just lost my one grandmother, my final grandmother, just a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So I had access to my grandmother, and my kids had access to two of their great grandmothers, well into my adult years, and for some of them into their adult years. So if you're popping out kids at 50, okay, they're going to be adults when you're pushing 70. And so they're not going to have access to you for as long. So having kids when you're younger, presumably you live, 70, 80, 90 years is a good thing.
See, Robert De Niro just had a kid like last year. He's like 90 years old or something.
That's ridiculous.
Oh, man.
I mean, I almost feel that's irresponsible.
Yeah.
Now he's a multimillionaire. He probably doesn't really spend too much time with the kids anyway. But that's strange. I mean, I don't know if he thinks he's Abraham or something.
I don't know.
But yeah, he's a pretty left leaning dude anyway.
Yeah.
So he's probably not going to raise that kid well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I just had one more thing. Do you remember that? I don't know if it relates. Do you remember that saying that Blake said, something about raise your kids now so you don't have to raise your kids when you're a grandparent or something like that? Do you remember that? Do you remember that
No,
saying?
but most of the things Blake says, I just tune out. No, just kidding. Blake's one of our pastors.
Anyway.
I vaguely remember something about that.
Something like, I forget how he worded it, but anyway. Okay.
Yeah, I think I can't recall, but if he did say that, even what you just said is good counsel.
It was quippier than that.
Yeah,
but,
well, I mean,
yeah.
Blake's a pretty sharp dude. So,
Yeah.
Okay, here's a sixth one. And I'm saying this, I'll tell you why I'm going to say this, but use technology, don't let it use you.
Mhm.
Use technology, don't let it use you. And specifically, I'm thinking of social media and the internet.
Mm.
The reason why I'm saying that is because people that are in their 20s today, I think this would be accurate, maybe even a few that are in their early 30s, but we'll use that decade. People that are in their 20s today are among the first generation of people who has no recollection of not having the internet or social media.
Yep.
So when I came to the city that I live in now in 1996, I was not regularly using the internet. Like we actually still survived somehow without the internet. And I remember having this little 14.4 modem flashing away in the corner of my desk so that I could plug in my computer and get a little bit of internet access. And literally, Eric, when you would open an email, it would often load in lines. So you'd have to wait as it came down. And shortly thereafter, I had my kids, my oldest son is pretty close to your age. And so I was thinking, he was born and you were born right around the time that the internet was just slowly coming.
Yep.
Like it'd been around obviously for quite a while, but really kind of coming into use. So I think it would be true to say that you have no recollection. Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
Like you have no recollection of not having the internet.
Yep.
And you have no recollection of not having social media.
Yeah. It kind of came around. I think I got Facebook sometime in grade 5, maybe. So it was early, but
so you're in your mid-20s. So you're the first generation that has no experience of living life without that. And so I would imagine it's almost unthinkable for you not to have that. But for me, I remember not having that. Mm-hmm. So I have the advantage, I guess, of knowing what it's about and using it, but also knowing that there was a world that existed in the distant past where that kind of technology wasn't there. And so the reason why I mention this is like people in my generation know how to live without it. But for the most part, people in your generation have no concept of how to live without it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a danger. And I want to encourage young people to use it, but don't let it use you. Like, don't make the mistake of being dependent upon social media or the internet for, your identity, your sense of worth, your relationships. Like, you shouldn't be using that kind of technology. Let's take text messaging, for example, to ask a girl out, to deal with conflict, to deal with issues with your spouse, you don't need that. So before the show, we were kind of joking a little bit because you had called me in my office and said, okay, we're ready in the studio to come in. And you made a comment because I know you don't check your text messages, right?
Yeah.
And so what I was saying is maybe where I differ from your generation is the way I think of it is if I want an immediate response, you dial the number, like you have a phone call.
Yep.
If I want a response within maybe half a day, I'll send a text message or whatnot. If I want a response within a couple days, I'll send an email.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, I don't have notifications set on my phone when I get text messages or signal messages or whatever, WhatsApp messages. Like, I don't have notifications because I don't want to live my life in such a way where it's ding, 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 ding. And I think some younger people find that almost strange because they have all the notifications set and they assume, oh, if you send a text, that's almost the same as a conversation and you need to respond immediately, but I don't. And it's because I don't want to live, and I know you can live without that constant, I would just call it internet harassment, texting harassment, or notification harassment. And I would say I'm guilty too of overusing it. When you go out, it's like, oh, where's your cell phone?
Yep. And
last weekend, as an example, I was at a party and I actually left my cell phone at someone else's house. And I drove home and I was doing some other stuff. So it was several hours later when my wife came out and said, oh, they called and said they have your cell phone. I'm like, oh, okay. And then all of a sudden you feel kind of naked.
Yeah.
Well, what if someone calls? What if someone messages? What if I got to look something up? And then I thought to myself, this is actually a good thing. It's good that for 6 hours or whatever, I didn't even notice I didn't have it. And then I actually survived the whole night. I'm still alive. And my wife was in Windsor the next day. And so it was almost, let's say, 20 hours, right? Where I didn't have access to my phone. But it's on your mind. It's like, oh, what if I need it? Or, oh, I want to check that out. And that's so weird. I don't want to live my life that way.
Yeah.
And I don't want young people in their 20s to think that they have to have that. They don't have to have it. So I'm not suggesting throw out your smartphone, just run with a flip phone. But I want people to be able to discipline themselves and learn to manage the usage of this and to be able to survive without it. And whether that is taking fasts from it, or reducing the number of apps you use, or setting notifications to off mode or whatever, it's important not to allow that kind of technology to dominate your life. It's very exhausting, actually. It can be very exhausting.
It's like the fig leaf you were talking about a few podcasts ago, right? Just kind of use it for everything to cover up and hide it behind the phone.
That's true too.
Yeah.
I think that's true too, in that it can be a bit of a Linus's blanket. Like it's like a safety. It's like you don't feel safe. I observe people in public, and again, it's not that I've never been guilty of this, but where were we? We were down in, a couple weeks ago, we went camping at a provincial park down near Simcoe.
Yep.
And we took our bikes, my wife and I were riding around the campsite, and it struck me that almost every campsite, so this is where you camp. This is where you have like bonfires and s'mores and play games and roast things over the fire and have fun and relax and go to the beach. Almost everyone at their campsite was sitting around the fire on their phone.
That's so sad.
It is.
Oh, that's so sad.
And then we went to the beach and almost everyone's on their phone. And then we were in Hamilton a couple days ago for a convention. And of course, out in the streets, you get people literally walking through traffic, like across a crosswalk. People are stopped, but people could run a light on their phone the whole time. Like if you look around, it's Linus's new security blanket for so many people. It's not cool.
No, it's
not helpful. No. So, okay, here's the seventh one. Looks like it's second from last. Pursue your formal education. So if that's your university degree, if you need one of those, your college diploma, you need one of those, or your tradesman's license. It's nothing wrong with going to school later on or re-educating, but it makes a whole lot more sense coming out of high school to get busy and get those certifications or educational requirements down as a means to the end, which is a career that can bring honor and glory to God. And then I would say a lot of your rudimentary education should have been taken care of in elementary school and secondary school. You should learn to read and write and whatnot. But the 20s is also a great time to now be able to pursue informal education. So you may not have time for this in high school, but to read more widely, to study topics and areas of interest that just interest you. And I went to school for a long time. I finished, 2 degrees in my 20s, and then 2 degrees in my 30s, and I liked that. Like I was always in ministry when I was doing that, but there wasn't a lot of time for just researching other things. And so now I'm not pursuing any degrees, but I can kind of study what I want.
Yeah.
If I want to read theology, if I want to read about farming, which I enjoy, if I want to take up a hobby and whatever, I want to educate myself broadly in what's going on in the world and have a broad knowledge base. No, I don't need to be an expert really in anything, but I want a bit of a knowledge of as many things as possible. And so I would encourage people to pursue informal education, to just read and absorb. This will help set you up for success in your career, especially the formal stuff. But also that informal education will help to set you up for success in life, because the problem with formal education is it's usually pillarized. It's usually one topic, one subject within a specific field. You become the expert, you get their certificate, but you don't know anything about anything else.
Yeah. Yep.
And informal education allows you to know a little bit about a lot of things.
Yep.
So reading history. So if you've completed your rudimentary education in high school, now is a great time to learn, to explore, to educate yourself in subjects that are of interest to you. And again, a little sidebar, when you're pursuing your formal education, I want you to think very deeply about debt, because many people are so concerned about getting post-secondary education that they go into incredible amounts of debt over it. And they don't think about the fact that that debt is now going to affect the next life stages, their 30s, their 40s. Many people, you hear people in their 40s still have not paid off their student debt. It's just overwhelming them.
Yeah.
Because at some point there was pressure to buy the house and buy the car. And all of a sudden it's just one payment. You're paying the minimum payment. And you can have your educational debt sticking with you forever. So my wife and I made the mistake, because we were completely undiscipled in this area, of taking on student debt individually. And then you get married and you're like, oh, now we got debt together. And our debt, this is back in the early 90s, totaled $25,000, which wasn't too far shy of my annual salary. And that's when I was discipled in the area of finances. And I advised all my kids to do otherwise, like don't go into debt. So we just hammered away at it, and we paid it off in 2 years, right? But it was hard. Like it was really pushing it to pay that off, basically living off one salary and putting everything else on student debt.
Yep.
But student debt might seem the easy way out when you're going to school. It's like, oh, free money. And it's not free. You're going to pay it back.
With interest
For a long time. Like it's not sexy on the other side of the degree. Mm-hmm. So I would just say when you're making decisions like that, think about the implications of that. It's not a bad thing to stretch your education out a little bit more. Mm. Like lots of schools offer part-time studies and pay for it as you go. And like you don't have to have your degree by the age that your buddy has his degree when he's taking out debt. Or maybe he comes from wealth, or maybe you come from wealth and it's not an issue. Okay, great. That's a blessing. But I have a sense that taking out student debt is almost always a bad idea for people.
Yeah, the more debt you incur, the more risk you expose yourself to. And I know it's not cool to, like you said, take a break and work for a year or two, but if that's what it takes, it's far less riskier. And yeah, it's really wise to do that.
And unlike, let's say, a mortgage, assuming you don't have a mortgage that's greater than the value of your house.
Yep.
Okay, you got a mortgage, but you have an asset.
Yeah.
So if you can't pay the mortgage, you sell the house and you're free and clear. You can't sell your degree. It's intangible, right? You can't sell your education back. It's not even like a car. Like a car is a depreciating asset, but at least there's still something there. Education is an immaterial asset. It's important, but you can't sell it. Like you are on the hook. And the solution, by the way, is not to petition the government to get rid of all student debt, because that's just putting it on the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. Don't be foolish. You're ultimately paying for it somehow, right?
Yeah.
Okay, here's this leads us then into the final one, which is money in your 20s. Each generation is, generally speaking, getting a little wealthier than the last. You might think, oh, I don't know about that. Like my parents bought a house earlier than we did. Well, I saw someone put a thing up on Facebook this week, and It might even have been this morning, but it said something about that. And then it said, yeah, but like your generation has, and it lists all these things that, like, let's say mine didn't.
Yeah.
Like, streaming services and expensive $6 lattes and, all the stuff that you guys have, that subscriptions to things and newer cars and cell phones, that we didn't have those things.
Yeah.
Like, everybody bought a crappy old beater when they bought their first car. We had a cell phone when we were first married. It was about this long. So if you're just listening, it was about 8 inches long.
Yep.
It had a 6-inch antenna. You would keep it in your glove box, and if you had an emergency, you would screw the antenna on.
Oh, wow.
And you dial the number, and it was by the minute, right? It was like $1.50 a minute or something. Wow. We kept that at our it's hilarious watching your face, dude. You're like, wow.
That almost seems more high tech than today.
But it was like an emergency phone, right? And now, and then the phones got really small, and now they're kind of a little bit bigger again. But they have so many advantages to them. But you guys have that, and you might think, well, I won't be able to buy a house till 5 years after my parents did. Yeah, but you're drinking $6 lattes, and you've been to Florida, and you're driving a relatively new car, and we didn't have those things. So I still think each generation is wealthier in general than the last. And if your parents set you up for that, why wouldn't you want the next generation to be wealthier than the last? It kind of should be the way things are going. But wealth can be quickly lost if you're not careful with your cash. And it has been. So I don't know how many people think about history, but we come from 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and so forth and so on. We come from a lot of different families. Each person comes from ultimately thousands of people.
Yeah.
Each of those people had jobs, had wealth, had homes, had property. Portions of what they earned were passed down through inheritances. You'd think that if over 100 generations, everyone just passed down a fraction of their net worth to the next generation, who then retained it and added to it, that we'd all be born, unimaginably wealthy, but we're not. Now, we have a certain measure of wealth in that we've inherited public infrastructure, right? That has been built and designed, land that's been cleared and roads that have been built through the taxes of previous generations. But in terms of just family wealth, if everyone took a little bit of wealth from their parents' earnings and then added to that and pass it on, there would be no poverty in the world.
Yeah.
But there is, because inevitably it only takes one generation to waste it all. And don't do that. Many people there's lots of stories of people who are very wealthy, and oftentimes it's because they've come from poverty. You notice that. And it's because they appreciate the value of money and they work for it. Other people, where they're just given a lot of gifts and handouts, and maybe they got a really early inheritance or whatever, they got a lot of money. They tend, I would say, not to do as well because they don't understand the value of money. So that proves that your mindset about money is equally important, and so I would say almost generally more important than how much money you have. So you'll see people who have modest incomes that over the course of their life get way ahead of people who have significant incomes because they don't seem to value it. So I would just say, in your 20s, make sure you're doing this in your teens, but get your money in order. So budget, save, avoid debt, give, and over time, he who gathers money little by little, the Bible says, we'll see it grow. Yeah. So be good with your money. Don't be a fool with your money, and you'll be able to pull ahead. You can also take risks. You can take risks a little more. Like you can handle a little bit of a bigger mortgage if you have a commensurate income because you have more years to pay it off. But if you're taking mortgages out in your 40s and 50s or even your 60s, you don't have as much time left. I mean, the runway is getting shorter, and you don't have as much time left to pay that off. So starting early, managing your money properly is a really good idea.
Yeah. And I know, like you said earlier, it is tough. And you're saying there are probably plenty of people in Canada who might not be able to afford a house till they're 40, but and housing's inflated like to a crazy amount now. And I get that, but it is possible. It's possible. Just got to think a little differently nowadays. Like maybe start a business, like more entrepreneurial. There's more opportunity, I'd say, in today's world than there ever was back in the day. The internet has connected people. Look into kind of like you were saying earlier, like if you're thinking about going to school, like ask yourself, is this degree going to get me a good return on my investment? Like, am I going to, if you're going to school and you're going to pay $40,000 for a degree, but your average salary is only going to be $50,000 when you graduate, is that worth it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like make those decisions.
Yeah. You don't want to pursue a vocation strictly based upon the dollars at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you got to factor that in.
Right.
And if you are, so let's just say you go to university for 4 years, okay, you immediately have to factor in two things. Number one, even at minimum wage, I'm losing 4 years of income.
Yep.
I'm losing like $38,000 a year.
Yep.
Let's say minimum wage in our province times 40 hours a week times 50, about $38,000. So I multiply that by 4. Okay, now I'm losing around $150,000 in income.
Yeah.
And then if I'm putting down $40,000, so automatically when I graduate, I'm behind 200 G's, right? So if I'm behind 200 G's and then I graduate and my salary is only 5% higher or 10% higher than people who just went right to work, like I'm never going to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, we don't want to think strictly about dollars and cents, because if I was thinking about dollars and cents, I wouldn't have gone into vocational pastoral work.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have spent 9 years in seminary to preach better. I would have gone into something else that would have generated high dollars early on, So we have to think about our calling.
Right.
But we also do need to think about the dollars and cents, and even as a pastor, like if the church wasn't able to fund me reasonably as a pastor in order to raise my children, I might have had to think twice about it or second guess whether that's what God wanted me to do or work part-time elsewhere or whatever.
Yep.
It would have made it a whole lot more difficult. So, I mean, we live in a material world. Yeah, we walk by faith, but the reality is there's material realities, and one of those is you need money to survive. So you have to think about the financial aspect of your decisions in education and how they affect your long-term outcomes.
For sure. Well, I think that's all we got for this podcast,
That's
right,
it,
Aaron?
man. Nothing more.
Cool. Well, that was awesome. That was great. I hope if you're 20 and you're listening to this podcast, you greatly benefited from that. Or if you're not 20, pass this along to someone who is, or in their 20s, sorry. And hopefully they can benefit from that. So thanks for listening. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to, feel free to drop us a 5-star rating. We'd greatly appreciate that. If you haven't downloaded our Beachhead app yet, feel free to do that. We have our backlog of all of our other episodes, and there are a couple other good podcasts on there that we know you'll love and enjoy too. So thanks, Aaron. Appreciate that. And we hope you'll catch you next time for another episode of Leadership Now with Dr. Aaron Rock.